Hey folks, I am on the Zoom line with Lori Wolf. Lori is the CEO. She is the president of the Foraker Group, which is based out of Anchorage, Alaska. Foraker Group works with state organizations, nonprofits, and tribal organizations, and they teach leadership and management skills, as well as they teach a bit about policy and procedures with nonprofits. So if you go to their website, which is forakergroup.org, you're going to see there is a heap of resources there. You don't just have to be from Alaska to benefit from it. So I highly recommend that. Of course, there'll be a link in the show notes. Hey, Lori, thanks for being on the program.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Super fun.
All right, this is great. This is Lori's third time. I think you're the first person I've had come 3 times. I've had a few people come back twice. And one of them actually turned into a regular segment. That's Tom, the lawyer. But you are the third time I had you on here, and it's because you are such a great resource. So I really appreciate being available.
Super fun, yeah.
And just to toot her horn a little bit, if you go in our podcast and you go back and find our interviews with Lori, you're going to find that her interviews are always in the top 10 list of all the podcasts we've done. So definitely excited to have you on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to get really specific about fundraising, right? Everybody wants to fundraise. Everyone needs money. But what I really want to talk about today is developing, and this is our topic, so introducing this to people, not just you, you're already aware of this topic, but for the audience, we're going to be talking about developing an annual or a year-round fundraising plan, a strategic plan for your fundraising, not just a strategic plan for your nonprofit, and not just, we need to raise money, but this is a plan for fundraising. And what goes into that, and the components go into there. So I guess the first question would be, why would we even need one if we just have one? We just have a big gala. Why would I need a strategic plan for nonprofits?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, really, for years, I was in the development field before my life at Foraker, and now in my role at Foraker, I'm still doing development. But for many years, doing this work, in the early stages, in my early 20s, I thought the same thing. Why do you need this? Why do you need this thing called a development plan? And what I realized pretty quickly in my early life was that if I didn't have a plan, I was going to do all the work all by myself. And fundraising is a team sport, and we need a team. And if we don't have a plan, a written plan, then we're left for other people to try to figure out what's in our head. And that's a really difficult place to be. And the other piece of that is that I think what happens is that people confuse a plan with a list of asking strategies. Mm-hmm. And those are really different things. I often say to people, you're like, oh, do you have a fundraising plan? And people say, oh, yeah. Or usually they actually say no. But then when they say yes, right, then they say, oh, yeah. And I say, oh, great, well, let me see it. And they show me this list, and it basically says like gala this and auction this and, event so-and-so this and cake whatever this. And, so it's just this list of asking strategies. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to be clear, like, that's not a fundraising plan. That's a list of asking strategies. Mm-hmm. And so I think we also have to really peel apart, like, what is a fundraising plan? So not just why would you want one, which I think the number one reason that you want one is because you want it to be a team sport. And we always hear that. If we separate board and staff into a room and we ask them what their biggest complaints about each other are, it is always, oh, my board doesn't fundraise enough. Oh, my staff doesn't all they ever talk about is fundraising, right? So there's real disconnect there. And we want to be donor centered. And that gets a lot of play, this term donor centered, but we can't do it without a plan. And so we have people who say they're doing it, but they're not really doing it. We need a plan. And then we have to talk about, like, what is a plan, right? Because we don't all agree about what a fundraising plan is. So,
right, yeah. Oh, I'm getting some weird feedback there. Okay. Yeah, well, I hear you. My idea of a fundraising plan would be basically, I mean, I have a fuller idea than this, but initially it would just be a calendar. We're doing this in April, we're doing this in September, and then we have our New Year's, and there's our plan, right? So that was pretty easy. What's the big deal? So you mentioned something there about I never thought of that as like how it brings in the team, right? It's a team sport. So I guess I just want to go right into that, which might be jumping ahead a little bit, but mm-hmm. How does having a plan make it a team sport, make it a team effort?
Well, so I'll go back. Maybe I'll actually just define a plan a little bit, just so we're on the same page about that too.
Good.
So for me, again, if we're going to be donor centered, then we have to move past just the ask, right? And a calendar is certainly a piece of a plan, but it's not the whole thing, right? That's just one component of a plan, and I would say that's the tactical side of it, right? So if a plan is really about identifying the different, really starting again, if we're going to be donor focused, identifying who our audience, who our donors are, who is it that we want to be talking to, and then understanding that there is no such thing as one size fits all fundraising. So we really need to start to segment and break apart the different groups of people we want to be communicating with. So our annual entry-level donors, those donors who are giving, between $1 and $25 or $1 and $50 or $1 and $100, depending on how you break that down. They get a whole set of strategies, the whole different strategies for our middle range donors, and then our major donors, and then even our planned gift donors. So these are all different. Those are all donors. And there are things called prospects, right? People who have not given yet, who have three things in common with our mission of our organization. They have a human connection, they have a demonstrated interest, and they have the ability and willingness to give. So those are then prospects. Well, again, so I've just listed, at a minimum, I've listed, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different audiences. If I don't have a plan for how I'm going to be in relationship with those different audiences, the only fallback to that is to have a one size fits all. And so when we think about why have an integrated plan, we really talk about what does it mean to build relationships with those different audiences, which then gets me back to the team sport. So who is it that builds those relationships? Who is it that does the ask? Who is it that does the thank you or recognition stage, right? So we talk about the full arc of a relationship, getting to know them, doing our research, building a relationship, doing the request, doing the recognition. For me, this is a circle that never ends, right? So I want board members to participate in each of those areas, or at least the areas where they're comfortable. I would love volunteers on my team to participate in different areas. And as staff, if I'm a one-person show, I may be facilitating all those, but if I have more than one on my team, I may have different staff facilitating different things. So team sport also breaks this myth that says, just like fundraising plans aren't a list of asking strategies, the myth out there as well is, if I'm not asking, I'm not participating. So we talk about a team sport and an integrated plan together because we want different people to participate in different stages of the relationship. And we need to have different relationship processes going on depending on what kind of donors we're talking about.
Right. And you would also need to be able to you just mentioned a whole bunch of levels of donors, right? So you have your kind of entry level, your middle level, your big donors, and you have your prospects. You need someone to figure out that, right? Like who these people are, and be able to figure out, well, these are our big donors, these are not big donors, these are our prospects, and someone's always curating that, I would imagine. So that's
Absolutely.
a job in itself.
Yeah, in our larger institutions, that is the job of your database person. Now, in most of the institutions that I have worked in, right, it's the one-person show. You're probably the executive director, the development director, the database manager, the grant writer, the communications person, like you're all those people, right? Oh, and you're the volunteer coordinator, right? You're like all those things, right? But our bigger institutions, those jobs start to get segmented. And yeah, for sure, in some of our organizations, there is a job called database management. And that person is like your most favorite person because they can mine your data and give you information that ensures that you don't create a one-size-fits-all approach.
Now, if you're approaching, if you're going towards, okay, well, I want to develop a fundraising plan for my year. Is that one of the first steps you need to do, is kind of segment your list a bit and try to figure out like who your audience is, where they fit in? It's not just who they are, but where do they fit within that?
I think it's one of the, I would actually back up a few steps before I got there and basically tie our plan to the larger connections to our mission. So I would say that money in a nonprofit, it serves a purpose, right? There's always a bigger why to the money. We don't just go out there and see how much money we can raise, and we don't just set a goal by going, well, I don't know, let's how much money we can raise. Okay, great, that's good, right? We say, no, like these are the goals of our organization. These are the goals of our mission or the goals of our organization, depending on how you think about it. this is our short-term goals, medium-range goals, long-range goals. So if you have a strategic plan, for example, or you have another document that outlines what your goals are, then you attach the money that it takes to reach those goals. And then from that, you say, well, okay, of that, how much of that money is philanthropic money? How much of it is charitable money coming from individuals, corporations, or foundations, i.e. not government, i.e. not earned income? So once then you've articulated how much money you need to actually raise, then you're attaching your fundraising goal, your fundraising plan to your strategic goals, right? So I do think that, again, you don't want to skip that step, because fundraising plan doesn't just live in a vacuum. I think the other step that I would encourage folks to really think about in advance is this whole, sometimes what we call a culture of philanthropy, or even more tongue twisty, your philosophy of philanthropy, which really is about making sure that the organizational values are embedded in any effort you put forward in your philanthropic activity. So making sure your values are driving the conversation, both with your donors internally and externally. And again, a big missing step for so many of our organizations, where kind of any old thing will do and it doesn't feel very good. And we have described, and this is where I often say, like, we take the fun out of fundraising, right? I always try to say, like, the first 3 letters of the word fundraising is fun. And when it stops feeling fun is often when we take our values out of the equation. So again, before we even get to the who do we want to talk to, I think we have some internal work to do, and to make sure that we're feeling that sense of alignment with our team, with our board and our staff, that we're feeling a sense of connection to our values, really important, and that we're finding that alignment all within the plan itself, both in our strategic plan and then in the plan we're going to reach. That's just a few kind of things that I would do before we ever got to the thing where we said, okay, now what?
Right. So
Yeah.
like, you're attaching the goals of the organization to this fundraising plan, the values of the organization, but also the values of your donors, because you're taking, like you just said, a great example, because when you disconnect from that, it's not fun anymore. You're not serving that purpose anymore from inside.
No.
And you probably lose that connection with your donors at the same time, because you're not speaking the same language anymore. They are donating because of their values as well.
That's right.
And so it's almost internal work you're doing to start out with. You're really,
yeah. I mean, I'm a big believer that fund development, is I have to say, right, 70% science, 30% art, and part of that, like, that's one ratio I often use, and part of that science is just to remember that you can get a PhD in philanthropy these days, right? You can find a university, you can get a PhD in this work. There's a science and a research practice behind this work called philanthropy, and we have to use that science. And then the art part is the mission, the values, the relationships, the ability to listen and be connected to donors. So I think you bring all those things together. I think the other kind of percentages I often use is this notion of kind of 30, 30, 10, 30, which the first 30 is this internal work. 30% of your work in philanthropy is around research. So doing 30% of your work in research, really thinking internally, who are we? What are our values? What are our goals? This thing about who do we want to talk to? What's our plan? Writing our plan. That's all part of the 30%. Then the next 30% is in relationship building. And I really define that primarily as being an awesome listener. It often gets defined as pushing information out, but I really believe it's about bringing people in. 10% of our time is in the request. That should be the easy part. That's the ask. And that's 10% of our time cumulatively, right? So that's the gala and the grant or the proposal and the face-to-face solicitation and the mail campaign and the phone campaign, like, that's all those things, right? And then the thing that makes this process go round and round and round is the last 30%, which is in recognition, which is really about really making sure that we are really, again, helping our donors we're being good stewards of their money. We're doing recognition and reporting back about the difference that the money made, because it's never about the money. It's never ever about the money, right? So so the long way of saying, right, that 30% of that initial 30% internal work, really getting your house in order and really thinking about this plan that you need to be writing and then living. Yeah.
That last 30% you mentioned, we kind of cut out a little bit. What was that?
Oh. So the last 30% is about recognition and reporting.
Recognition, right? Okay.
So being a good steward of people's money and being a good steward to back to mission as well. The essentially kind of the report back. What difference did the money make, right? So
Right.
for me, the recognition piece so critically important and often a missed step. But in my mind, the thing that makes the donor relationship circle go round and round and round and round, I often say to organizations that I have the pleasure of working with that if what they did in this year in 2018 was focused on donor recognition and stewardship, they would raise more money even if they did nothing else differently, because that piece is often so missed in the process. And so in our fundraising plan, sometimes the whole plan can feel too overwhelming. So sometimes where we start in our donor recognition is in our fundraising plan, the first thing we actually write is our donor recognition component to the plan. And that actually, for some groups, can just live all alone outside before we even write the rest of it, because sometimes the rest of it feels too big. So we can peel the plan apart if that feels more manageable for groups.
I think a lot of listeners are going to be really happy to hear that what for many is the hardest part, the ask, the request, is only 10% of this. Like you laid out a plan that people might be like, oh, that now you put the fun back in the fundraising.
Yeah, that's
sounds
right.
all right.
But again, it only happens if you have a plan. Because if you don't have a plan, you'll spend 90% of your time on that, where you should be spending.
Asking and not getting as much in return, right? So like just having that plan, starting with that research and then really building those relationships. That's, people might not like the data and the research, but the building and the relationship building would be fun, and the thanking and the recognition, and which puts it back into the circle. So when the next series of events come up, you have a deeper connection. You've maybe moved those prospects into a lower tier or middle tier donor. And each time you go through that, you build it. You'd be strengthening, I would assume.
Exactly right. I think also important to remember, right, that the definition of success in all of this isn't necessarily money. Right. So for many of the groups that are probably listening, success in a first year plan, whatever first year means for you, right? But often if we're really just kind of ramping up our place to that, we're ready to write a fundraising plan and we're ready to take this thing kind of seriously and stop spending 90% of our time where we should be spending 10% of our time. The first set of goals might actually be infrastructure goals. They might be internal, non-financial goals. It might be like getting my board all trained up and making sure the board really feels a sense of ownership and stewardship to this thing called charitable giving or philanthropy. It might include training or job descriptions or pledge forms or so that could be success. It could also be around volunteer training, or it could be about, we talked a little bit about a database as if everybody's got one. I know lots of people don't have one, right? And you can't do this kind of work where you're segmenting your audience if you don't have a good database, right? And I don't mean an Excel spreadsheet that somebody's, uncle's cousin's mother's made, right? I mean, I really mean like a real donor database, which thankfully, because of technology, is actually pretty accessible for everyone these days. There's everything out there on the internet from free to $30,000, so people can kind of find their space there. When I started in this world, there was no free, right? So there's free now, which is great. So sometimes I just want to say too, like year one of a plan, maybe for your listeners, you're actually going to write a multi-year plan, not just a single year plan, because year one goals won't look like money, they'll look like infrastructure. And it won't be till year 2 or 3 that we actually start including goals that look like money. So I also just want to give that kind of context too, because for lots of our startup organizations, we got to build the system to support an annual donor. Think of annual giving as a habit, like the most healthy, fabulous habit you've ever had in your life, being an annual donor. Well, that means that as a nonprofit organization, we have to have the infrastructure to hold that habit. Because people don't just roll out of bed in the morning and go like, oh yeah, I forgot to write my check, right? And in fact, most people don't actually have checkbooks anymore. So, right? So we have to create enough infrastructure that we're ready to help people support that habit. And most of our nonprofits just don't have
that. I really like how you're approaching that. Getting some feedback. Oh, I bet it's your speakers. I bet sometimes are coming through. on your microphone. That might be the feedback I hear each time. Um, in any case, I like the idea of building that infrastructure. It takes kind of the pressure off too. It's like, oh no, we have to have a fundraising plan, which means we're going to have X amount we need to raise. We're going to have to do 3 of these. How are we going to do this? And it's like, well, slow down.
Yeah.
You can still do those fundraisers, but the important work is building that foundation. And you're talking about foundational work here. So you mentioned quite a bit there, building your board, getting a database, kind of getting that training in there. And this is base type work. Once you kind of have that base built and the next step in the plan, like, is it really just put those dates in there and figure out, is there a flow to that? What's the next part of that plan?
So I think the next part of the plan is actually around the numbers part. So I often say, right, philanthropy doesn't have anything to do with money, but in this case, in this moment in time, it has something to do with money. So we generally build something called a gift chart. So the gift chart is the mathematical equation for how we reach our goals. And a gift chart, your listeners can Google gift charts and they'll see 1,000,001 examples, and some of them are helpful and some of them are not. So, Google carefully. But a gift chart, again, kind of gives us the financial feasibility of what we want to do. So let's just say I want to, raise $25,000. I've determined that I need to raise $25,000 for my nonprofit organization's mission in this next fiscal year or the next calendar year, however you're calculating that. Well, so then, and I'm going to use an annual fundraising as the goal. Now, really importantly, it doesn't matter how I'm going to spend it. This matters that I'm going to raise it, right? So how I spend it is a different conversation. So I'm going to raise $25,000. And so I need to then determine my gift chart for that. And I'll just give a moment of primer on a gift chart. So a gift chart is, the way we create a gift chart is that we consider we need a real number. We don't just see, we have a real number, $25,000, this example. And then the next thing that we do is we determine, like, what is the single largest gift we can receive. And, in this organization, that might be $5,000 or $10,000. It's not going to be a whole, well, probably 5 would be the max, right? That would be a really big gift. And what we know about that is that we only are ever it's so big that we'll only get one of them. And so we call this a stretch gift because it's a pretty big deal for us. And we usually have some experience with raising the number right below it. So let's say it's $5,000 would be our stretch. We might have some experience raising a $3,000 gift. And we're just going to help that donor just stretch a little bit more in 2018 and help us, reach that goal. So we figure out those numbers, and then we figure out the next place we go is to the very bottom of our gift chart, and we ask ourselves, based on our history, based on our track record, or based on our best guesses if we have no track record, what's the average entry level gift we think we can that we think we're going to raise? And for most of our nonprofits, that's somewhere around $25, kind of an average entry level gift. And again, it's not that you're not going to have a recognition strategy that says, oh, I'm going to thank every donor, regardless of the size of their gift, $1 or whatever. But this just starts us at the average entry level, about $25. Then we fill in the rest of the categories in that column, really based on kind of how the money typically comes in. The next column over is about the number of gifts we need in each category. And in this case, we're going to use something called the 80-20 rule. 80% of the money comes from 20% of our donors. This is just general good science of fundraising for annual fundraising. If we were doing capital campaigning, we'd use different percentages. So we use the 80-20 rule. We take out our calculator, and we actually do the math. Okay, well, we need 1 gift of 5,000. We need 3 gifts of 3,000. We need, so many gifts of 1,000, et cetera, all the way down to our $25. In the next column over, we think about the number of prospects we need. So we notice, right, these are the number of gifts we need. Here are the number of prospects we need. So again, a prospect is a potential current, or it's a current donor or a potential donor who has linkage, interest, and the ability or willingness to give the amount of money we put in the column to the left. And it could be corporate, foundation, or individual. And we have a ratio there as well. The textbook or the internet will tell you it's a 5-to-1 ratio. So what that means is our 1 gift of $5,000, we would need 5 potential donors to give that gift. I often say in Alaska or a small community, or just if you're a little bit less risk averse, you might use a lower ratio. In Alaska, we often use a 3-to-1 ratio at the top of our gift chart. because we know so many of the players, we take some of the guesswork out of it. I would say 5-to-1 is when you're feeling like you have a lot of guessing going on. At the bottom of our gift chart, we might use a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every 100 donors I need at $25, I need to have 200 prospects. And again, this is where that database comes in. We really need a good database to do this work. So from that, I have begun that gift chart work. I have begun to segment my audience, because right away we figure out we're going to have a lot more donors at the $25 level than we are at the $10,000 or $5,000 level. And my strategies can really be different. And my human capacity, or my time and energy, and the time and energy of the board can also then get distributed throughout the whole gift chart. So that becomes the basis of our plan. Oh, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm clicking. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
I can hear you now.
When you're done with that chart, do people often go, oh, wait a minute, we're not being very realistic? When they look at the numbers based on the ratio 2-to-1 or 5, however they're doing it, like,
yeah.
We might be overshooting here, or vice versa. We could possibly generate more, because as we punch in these numbers from the data person, you may realize you could ask for more if you wanted to, or less.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'll give you an example of this so you can share with your listeners as well, so they can see it in real life, which would be fun. But absolutely, like this is like the cheapest feasibility study you could ever do, right? Because you do this gut check, right? You're bored and you kind of sit around the room and you go like, oh my gosh, like this is completely impossible. Like we don't have this many people in our database. We don't even have a database, right? Or, oh my gosh, we have so much access to so many more people. We really are, we're just not aiming high enough. Like we have so much more potential than we thought we did. So it is that immediate moment. If you're not getting the immediate moment, then the next step that you do is that step that you asked me about a couple of minutes ago, which is to actually do that exercise of like, well, then who are they, right? Because that's the next question. In the prospect donor line, right, we're saying, well, who are these people and these corporations and foundations? Who are our potential donors and prospects? And literally, we're going through a process, and I can't describe that all in this podcast, but there's a whole process that we then go through to actually identify the linkage, interest, and ability of each of our different audiences, and then we put them in our gift chart. And right away, then we go, oh, okay, great. Well, if this is how much money we need, and this is who they are, now what's our strategy to be in relationship? How are we going to build relationship? And then we go, oh, how are we going to actually do our ask? Because right away we figure out, right, you're not going to ask your $5,000 donor from the podium at your auction. Like, don't do that. Bad strategy, right? You're going to have a one-on-one conversation with them. Or if they're a corporation or a foundation, you're going to ask them with your fingers and write them write a proposal or write them a letter. So it also tells us how to do the ask. And then finally, it tells us also how to say thank you. And so that becomes the basis of our plan, which is more how it gets to be more holistic.
Yeah, I can see the gift chart would be almost something you're putting on your wall, your bulletin board. You're looking at this because so many things you can go backwards and forwards from it. Like we need to go back and get more prospects because we're missing this. We need to figure out how we're going to reach our 5,000 donors and who they are, identify who they are, or what's the methods we're going to use for this. Now, this chart you're making here, is the basis of the strategic plan for fundraising, or is this specific towards one particular fundraiser?
No, I would say I would do it for your whole plan. Like I would use it for your whole fundraising plan. It is the basis, it's the backbone to your fundraising plan. Now, some groups particularly might do it for a specific, like if we were doing a capital campaign, a specific campaign for like a building or some sort of major program redesign, we might do a separate gift chart for a specific campaign. But for the most part, what I'm speaking about here is, because the ratios might be different, but so here I'm talking about kind of doing one for all, so we need to raise $25,000 for the entire year for the organization. Again, most of your folks will be raising more money than that, but that whole thing, again, doesn't matter how we spend it. That's a different conversation and probably a different chart. This is about how much money, how much philanthropic or charitable money do we want to raise in a year, fiscal year, calendar year, however you do that. The other thing to say is It doesn't matter if I'm your $5,000 donor, again, it doesn't matter how I give it. I might give it in a pledge over the course of the year. The idea is that I'm number one, like I'm a one person, regardless of whether I take 16 ways to give it to you, right? So I'm a one donor giving you $5,000, and I might give it in a pledge. I might do all sorts of things, right? So it doesn't matter how I give it to you. It doesn't matter how I spend it. It's the backbone of the plan. Oh, you're muting again.
Sorry, I'm muted. We're getting reverb on the audio here. Sorry. So we are so now we have this is your overall annual kind of outline here that you've done. And then do you take this and you kind of segment it into the different fundraisers you're going to do, and how do you use this to determine those fundraisers, right? You're not going to have a fundraiser every month. Well, maybe you do, I don't know, but you're probably not going to have a fundraiser every month. You have your 2 or 3 or whatever. Are you taking those fundraisers and saying we're going to target specific donors in this fundraiser, and then this one's going to be targeted more towards other donors, or are you basing that on the objective, the goal of each fundraiser, or
so for me, my hope is that we actually can move our nonprofits away of doing just event-based fundraising. In my opinion, it's not a great way to raise money. It's a ton of time, money, and energy that doesn't actually have the return that we often hope for. And I think that so many of our nonprofits are doing special events of all shapes and sizes because it's what they can see other people doing. What they can't see happening in some of our other organizations that are actually raising probably far more money than they are, is they can't see the one-on-one coffee date. They can't see the strategic personalized letter. They can't see the really personalized phone call. They can't see, so much of the stuff that's being more customized. And so I think the value of doing a gift chart and doing a plan is that it actually moves us away from an event-based strategy. I'm not completely anti-event. I think that events serve a purpose. But I think that if we are solely event focused, we are really going to miss the opportunity to raise true philanthropic dollars, because most of the money that we get raised in a special event is actually not philanthropic. It's not charitable. People are getting a really great deal on a silent auction item, but they're not making a philanthropic gift. And they're also, they feel like they bought their ticket, right? So that ticket, in fact, probably cost them more money than probably cost the nonprofit more money than they're giving. So for me, I think that the idea here of taking the step to write a plan and really pull apart our donors in terms of different audiences and different levels of giving is our opportunity to think differently about the ask. So many of our organizations are just focused on the event because it's what they think is the only way to do it. And it's just one way. And in most cases, it's not a very effective way. When events are effective is when they have a clear definition of success. And sometimes that definition of success includes money, but often it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with donor stewardship or recognition. It has to do with launching a program or helping people be aware of something, raising a larger issue. It can be about this notion of prospecting, of finding out who actually cares about our mission. And so there's a lot, and in any one of those strategies, any one of those definitions of success, our activity, the things that we'd ask of the board members, the things that we'd ask of our staff, the things that we'd say at the podium would be different depending on those definitions of success. So often our organizations just skip that step about what is success, and they just roll forward as if they're all going to have the same result, which is about money. And unfortunately, that just doesn't often yield the result that they want. I also say the burnout factor is huge. and I feel really passionate that if you're burned out at the end of whatever activity you just did, we all lose, right? Because we need your energy around mission and relationship. And if you're burned out, nobody wins in our society. So that's not helpful for you or mission. So your question, I think, is really about, how do we attach the right kind of ask to the right kind of donor? And some of that is a bit trial and error if you've never done it before, but I would generally say you're always going to be well served. The more personal you get, the more success you will have. So a personalized letter is going to be more effective than a direct mail letter, right? The dear friend letter, right? A personalized phone call is going to be more effective than a robocall, right? So if you start to think about how your capacity, board, staff, volunteer, to actually get personal, you'll be more effective. The other thing to think about is how can you start to combine your strategy? So if you're very event focused, how do you combine your event with a follow-up letter, or your event with a follow-up phone call, or your event with an email campaign, or your event with a, so how do you start to combine your strategies so you can actually have, you can create more of that habit?
Right. And I like that idea too, because you're building off of it. When you do events, a lot of people do the galas and all that. And it is, you're tired after that.
I
and,
know.
and a lot of times you don't make, you spent almost as much as you made and things like that. So it's a lot of energy. What did you get out of it type thing? And if you use that, if you leverage that for a follow-up mailing list, or we're going to take this into a campaign, or we're going to build on the story we were telling there, whatever, that would be a great way to go about that. Connecting the ask to the donor. I like how you said that, because there isn't a one size fits all. And of course, events definitely don't, that's trying to be a one size fit all, I guess. So, different ways of doing that then, I guess, like we would, my nonprofit, we teach, a lot of people know this, I teach people with disabilities how to run a dog team. And so one of our ask is sponsoring a dog. Very common. Iditarod mushers, a lot of mushers do this. And we've nurtured a relationship with these people where it's almost like sponsoring a child in Africa or whatever. Like they get the picture, right? They get a Valentine's gift. They get the booty from the dogs, things like that we send out personally from the dogs to them. And our recurring sponsors, like, they're sad if they don't get the opportunity to do the same dog each time. We give them personalized artwork. We had a woman donate stained glass art of each dog, which was beautiful. It was amazing. So neat things like that. It doesn't generate a lot of funds, but this is connecting the right, I think at least, kind of asking the right ask with the donor. What other ways are there to do that? You're talking about coffee, which is obviously you're doing that more with the higher up when you're doing a direct ask of a large sum.
Well, sometimes we're, it's, I've had board members who said, my favorite board member conversation about coffee was, I had a board member once who he said to me, he said, Lori, I hate fundraising. I was like, oh, really? Tell me more about that. Because he was so good at it, and kind of single-handedly would just raise a lot of money, and really, really happy donors along the way. And I was like, well, really, well, tell me, what do you hate about it? It's really strong, passionate, right? And he said, well, I don't mind taking people to coffee and talking with them about what they love and listening to them about tell their story. And I'll tell my story about why I'm so connected to this mission and what difference it makes. He's like, but I don't like fundraising. And I was like, okay, well, let's just call it coffee, right? Like, we don't have to call it, like, some people are just turned off by the word. They decided that word means something rather negative. Unfortunately, in this country, we have, or maybe other countries too, but for sure in this country, we have associated really negative language to fundraising. So we do a lot of things where we're like, we hit people up and we twist their arm and we pull their leg and we do all this really negative stuff, which just is so amazing to me. Because of course, you used a word that's one of my favorite words, which is about opportunity, right? So I would often say, right, this is about opportunity, not about obligation. This is about want to, not have to, right? So I'm always confused when we attach negative language to this stuff. But the coffee thing, and I use that rather metaphorically, but sometimes really, right, is really about, do you want to have coffee with a $25 donor? You should do that, right? You don't have to just save that for the $10,000 donor. Have coffee with the $25 donor. You will learn so much about why that person cares about mission. Better yet, for you, have coffee with a dog and a $25 donor, because that's who they really care about, right? So bring mission into it. Like, donors aren't giving money to you. They're giving money through you to the thing that they care about. So if they care about dogs, like, please bring the dogs, like, everywhere. So there's that. I just want to kind of say that. The other thing is you asked really about kind of a sponsorship opportunity here. And what I think if we're not careful, sometimes I certainly have seen, it doesn't sound like that was your example, but sometimes I've just seen that the sponsorship opportunity, sponsor us, fill in the blank, right, can feel pretty transactional, right? Like I'm buying something, like they're buying a dog, right? Well, they're certainly not buying a dog. What they're buying, and well, really, they're not buying anything, right? What they're creating and what you're giving them an opportunity for, again, you use that word, really love it, is the experience, right? The transformational opportunity to connect the mission. And so I think there's lots of ways to do that, right? We don't have to sell, we're not selling anything, and they're not buying anything. They're connecting to things that they care about. So you use the mechanism of the dog to start the conversation, but then you said, oh, then the dog sends them letters, and the dog follows up, and the dog does stewardship, and the dog, right? Like, that's not transactional, that's transformational. You said they feel sad, they feel disappointed if they don't get to keep that connection. That is what we're after. And so everyone, all your listeners, right, take out dog, insert mission, right? We can all do that. I think what happens is that we forget that, and we think that we're somehow trying to sell something, like I have to sell something. You're not selling anything, right? And your donors aren't buying. They're having experiences. And I think the more we remember that, and again, most organizational values should drive them in that direction, which is why I suggested that we start there in the beginning. So I love your example, though, because it really brings that donor into that experience, which again, you're not just pushing information out, you're really bringing the donor into the experience. Super important, not accidental.
And I like what you said, this phrase, they're not donating to you, they're donating through you. I really like the feel of that. It's okay.
Yeah.
Whew, it's not a burden on me anymore. It feels much better, and I feels easier to ask now.
Yeah, well, you say that like we teach people how to ask for money, and we remind them, right? No, it's not, oh my gosh, I can't believe you asked me for money, right? I'm never saying no to you because I'm not giving you the money, right? So that does flip for people that moment when they're asking for money, which I think is great.
Sorry, my mute was on again. And then the idea of, I like the metaphorical coffee, but that kind of one-on-one, the relationship building of not just doing it with big donors, but actually maybe it's even, I hate to say practice, you're practicing on lower donors, but maybe it's a little less stressful if I know I'm going to meet a $50 donor, but I'm going to practice listening. I'm going to practice hearing what they need, why are they interested in donating. Even if it's $50, it might mean a lot to them, but I've got the practice now and I've learned a lot in the process. So maybe when I go to the $100 donor or the $500 donor, it's the same conversation. It's just a different amount of money.
Yeah. And it's also, what we get to practice is being good listeners. And I think that's remarkable, because when we do the practice asking with people, one of the questions I ask is, who talked more, the person asking or the person being asked? And our best askers are actually our best listeners, because you don't have to climb up on your soapbox and convince people that what your mission is about is important. They know that. And what you have to do is provide all the stewardship and credibility so that they know that their money is going to be spent as they intended. So really that honoring donor intent piece. And that is a lot about just really listening and connecting up for them to the information that they need to feel that.
We've talked about kind of that foundation, building the foundation, your donor list, and doing the segmentation of it, putting this into a gift chart. And now we're talking kind of in general terms about ways to connect with your donors, connect the ask with the donor. Now we're a little bit short on time now, because I'd love to go into more detail on exactly how does this work, because it almost feels like a funnel in some ways, but almost a reverse.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah, and now we're going out there, and we have different campaigns, for lack of a better word, of getting these donors connected. Can you tell us more about it? It almost seems like that's the next it's the ask, I guess. Like
Yeah,
what's the
it's the ask, and then we move to recognition. And so,
right?
like I said, some of your folks on the call, they might or listening in, might actually write their recognition plan first and then come back and write the other pieces. And again, just like we segmented our giving levels, we might actually find those same segments happening in our recognition levels, maybe less segmentation in recognition. Everyone should be thanked. I'm a big believer in that, regardless of the size of their gift. But you might not thank everybody exactly the same, right? Because again, you're going to have a lot more $25 donors than you are $1 million donors. So you may thank the $1 million donor differently, and you just have to decide. All recognition should be about bringing them back to the thing that they care about, which is mission. So really making sure that feels that connection. And again, for those of you who are trying, bringing it all the way back to the team sport conversation, the easiest way to get your board and volunteers involved, and even other staff involved, if this isn't in their job description per se, is in recognition. Most people don't want to do the ask, but if you say, hey, could you spend, can we do a thankathon? Can we buy some pizza and then put everybody at a phone and just call up a bunch of people and go like, hey, thanks so much, your gift was so awesome, we did a cool thing, or you did a cool thing, or whatever that is, and everyone's got not a script, but a few key talking points and a couple of open-ended questions, just in case you're not just talking to people's voicemail. But imagine coming home from work and like getting this cool call that just said thank you. That would be amazing, right? So lots of people they'll write the card or whatever that is. So you want to build in your recognition plan, or in your integrated fundraising plan, you want to make sure recognition is in there. The other piece is just to make sure that what's in your integrated plan is your evaluation of success. So again, we talked about that at the beginning, but we want to make sure, like, what did we learn? Because in an organization, we have to learn. We are going to learn just like our donors are going to be learning. We are going to be learning. And again, about creating this habit is about not throwing it out with the bathwater in 2019 and starting from scratch. Once you write this plan, all you'll be doing is tweaking it from now on. And that's really good news for your folks who are like, oh my gosh, where am I going to find the time to write this plan, right? You really only have to find the time to write it from scratch once. And after that, you're just fixing maybe quarter by quarter by quarter, or event by event, or however you're doing that. But you're just tweaking from here on out, which is exciting. And then as you get more comfortable and things get a little easier, you can add new components. But before you add, just get the basics down.
Now, you'd mentioned we can go Google gift chart and all that and kind of find these things. Do you guys use a template yourselves? Do you have one at all? Or?
We do. We have a worksheet, and I'm happy to share that with you. And I'll also share an example of that $25,000 one too. So we have a little worksheet that people can use to kind of figure theirs out. The thing that I don't love about the Google version, honestly, is there's something called, if you Google, you'll find a gift chart calculator. And the thing that I don't love about that calculator is it doesn't know you. It doesn't know what a big gift is and what a small gift is, and it doesn't know your organizational culture, and it doesn't know your board capacity, and it doesn't know you. So it's just doing math, which is lovely, but not as helpful as if you did it yourself with your own information. And I've never seen two gift cards look exactly the same when we really take it in and apply our organizational culture and our process and what we know about our donors. Then it's going to be unique to you, and you're going to be able to live it so much more. So people can Google, and I'll share my tools with you.
Awesome. We'll be sure to have that as a download in the show notes, folks. So when this publishes, I'll let you know the link to that, and we'll make sure it's available. Any last thoughts for our fundraising friends out there who are understanding probably more on how to develop their strategic plan? How are they going to approach it now? Final thoughts to kind of get them kick-started, I guess, as they move on.
Well, I guess the final thing that I would say is something that I think about in my work all the time, which is in fundraising, which is go slow to go fast. Don't hesitate to just slow down, take a deep breath. Remember that there is a science behind this, that you don't have to invent that science. That there are lots of resources available to you, and just slow down long enough to just remember all of that, and then just take out 10 minutes of every day and work on the plan, and then 10 more minutes, and then 10 more minutes, and and don't try to do it all by yourself. If you sit at your desk and write a plan all by yourself, you're not going to have a team sport. So get your team together and then work on your
I like that. That's really good advice. Folks, again, it's Foraker Group, and we'll make sure we have a link in the show notes. And Lori, how do we get a hold of you? And tell us, you have a lot going on there. Like when people go there, there's a lot of resources.
Yeah.
Some things that are upcoming for you and I is close to the end of March. I'm looking at publishing this in about 2 weeks. So April events coming up that people can participate in.
Sure, we do a whole bunch of classes that are kind of like this, but they're more class content. They'll have slides and conversation. They're all live, and people can, most of them are online. So we do some in-person classes around the state of Alaska, but do a lot online. So anybody can dial into those. You just sign up on our website through our calendar, and there's a whole class listing on the calendar. So yeah, look around. There's not just on fundraising, but governance and HR and finance and all the things that impact your nonprofit. Happy to have lots of participants there. And then there's resources, lots of tools in the toolbox there. And then we also do lots of one-on-one work. So if you're really just feeling like you're struggling a little bit and you want some one-on-one work, we can sure help you there. We're under a redesign of our website. We realize it's pretty old school, so we ourselves are in the midst of some construction. But so if you can't find something, let us know. It's forakergroup.org. We have a good contact us button. I actually see almost all those that come through. So yeah, just let us know if we can help. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, and also, folks, I'll make sure there's links also to previous interviews of Laura. You're going to see interviews. I think we talked about rogue board members and maybe board development. I think those.
We did sustainability model too.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
And it was always just as informative. Again, I feel like we just barely put a drop in the bucket on this conversation, but again, very informative. And thanks so much for being on the program.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So fun. And good luck to you and to all the folks who are listening.